Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So my name is Nur Iman Naziha binti Muhammad Nazri, and I'll start the presentation on analysis of global business cycle by giving the definition of business cycle itself. Next slide. So, from the 1946 magnum opus by Arthur F. Burns and Wesley C. Mitchell in Measuring business cycles are a type of fluctuation found in the aggregate economic activity of nations. A cycle consists of expansion occurring at about the same time in many economic activity, followed by similarly general recessions. This sequence of changes is recurrent but not periodic. So based on the business cycle diagram here, which is the first one is expansion. Expansion is when economic growth with positive economic growth towards peak, which is when the GDP at its maximum. Next, followed by the recession, is when the downfall of the economy itself. Next is depression. Depression happened when the economy got severely declined, and through is when the GDP at its minimum and the economic growth gave the negative in number. Recovery is when the GDP started to recover from the negative economic growth, and the graph goes on. Next slide. So we'll be discussing about the Great Depression that happened in 1929 until around 1939. So the Great Depression is the longest, most extreme depression, profound shift in economic structure, economic theory, and also macroeconomic policy. As it originated in the United States, it also gives a significant decline in productivity, severe unemployment, and also acute deflation in almost every other country in the world. So in August 1929, economy started declining as in 650 bank collapse. Economy then shrank another 8.5% in 1930, and the GDP dropped by 16.1% in 1931. 23%, 23.2% in 1932, and in 1933 it only produced $56.4 billion, which is half of what it produced in 1929. Then the stock market took 25 years to recover. Next, we'll be talking about Asian financial crisis that happened in 1997 until 1998. It all started in Thailand. Decided to uncouple their Thai baht from the US dollar, which causing sequence of currency devaluation and also huge capital flight. Countries that are affected by the crisis are Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, and also Indonesia. It can be seen by the currency of the exchange rate, stock market, and also the prices of all assets or get all plunges. And from the graph, it can be seen that the GDP that dropped in Indonesia is 43.2%, Thailand by 21.2%, Malaysia by 19%, South Korea by 18.5%, and in Philippines by 12.5%. The crisis then became global when it extended to Russian and Brazilian economy.
Okay, my part is the causes of the Great Depression. So, I think about my part, I think the main reason is financial instability and credit cycles. So, a period of stability encouraged more borrowing and lending than prudent, sowing the seeds for future instability. So, are they in a circle? Only people with good credit and investment ideas can borrow. Economic growth convinces lenders to expand credit, causing the economic to boom. But eventually, credit reaches to many non-credit worse borrowers. So uh, default rates spike. These lenders tighten lending, starting a credit crunch. The credit also enhanced instability in the market since people borrow to buy stocks. When people to sell stocks to pay down debt, this caused the stock price to drop more rapidly. So in 1929, stock market cash caused uncertainty among consumers about the economic. This caused many to stop buying more medium and long-term goods, which slowed down economic activity. So about my second reason, I think it's reduced money. In insufficient spending, the money supply reduction and debt emerging led to falling price and future bankruptcies. So with significantly less money to go around, business could not get new loans and could not even get their old loans renewed, so forcing many stop investing. So
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Hula Chao and my part is the impact of the Great Depression. Okay, next. First, I'm going to present impact on American economy. The Great Depression had a serious impact on American economy. During the Great Depression, about 2 to 4 million middle school students dropped out of school, and many banks and factories closed down one after another. And countless people were homeless. Among them, the most serious impact of the Great Depression is unemployment. As you can see in the graph, in the United States, the total number of employment people is 8.3 million. At the same time, about 34 million adult men and women have no income, close to 28% of the total in the United States. During the Great Depression, about 50 million people were looking for a job, including a large number of young people who had just graduated from college, but there was no job to do anywhere. In American cities, many successful businessmen and bankers were forced to run mobile fruit tough for a living because of bankruptcy. Agriculture capitalists and large farmers destroy surplus products, replace coal with wheat and corn, and poured milk into the river. Uh, Next. Uh, Second, I'm going to talk the impact on the other country. So this is impact on the Germany economy. The Germany was hit hard by the Great Depression, in which the supply of American aid loans to Germany stopped. Because of the recession, employment has soared, especially in the big city, and politics has turned to extremism. In 1932, the unemployment rate was close to 30%. The number of unemployed is 6 million. And the public increasingly supported the Nazi Party and the Communist Party. In January 1933, a Nazi Party came to power and established a dictatorship government which paved the way for the Second World War. Next. The impact on Australia economy during the Great Depression on the 1930s. Australia has suffered from years of high unemployment, poverty, low profit, deflation, low income, and the loss of opportunity for economic growth and personal promotion. Australian economy and foreign policy to a large extent became the main producer of British Empire. Australia's important export industries, especially the main products such as wool and wheat, were seriously affected by the collapse of international demand. In 1932, employment reached a record high of about 30%, while GDP fell by 10% between 1929 and 1931. Okay, next. So last one is impact on Canada economy. The Great Depression of the early 1930s left millions of Canadians unemployed, hungry, and homeless. It is called dirty 1930s. Few countries were affected as much as Canada. This was due to Canada's heavy dependence on the export of raw material and agricultural products, as well as the severe drought problem in the three provinces, as also known as black storm events. The high unemployment rate and the low loss of saving eventually triggered the birth of social welfare. Various populist political movement and the Canadian government played a more active role in the economy, which finally made Canada a very big exchange. After by the global economic recession and the Black Storm event, the industrial production index of Canada dropped in 1932 to 58% in 1922, ranking second only to the United States, ranking second in the world. Gross national income fell to 56% of 1922 at the height of the Great Depression in 1933. The unemployment rate reached 28%.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Muhammad Azam Faiz, and I will present about causes of Asian financial crisis. Next slide. The causes of the Asian financial crisis are complicated and disputable. The major cause is considered to be the collapse of the hot money bubble. And during the late 1980s and early 1990s, many Southeast Asian countries, including Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea, achieved massive economic growth of an 8% to 12% increase in their gross domestic product, which is GDP. The achievement was known as the Asian economic miracle. However, a significant risk was embedded in the achievement. The economic development is in the countries mentioned above were mainly boosted by export growth and foreign investment. Therefore, high interest rates and fixed currency exchange rates were implemented to attract hot money. Also, the exchange rate is favorable to exporters and this seems very appealing for them. Next slide. Okay, this is when the start of the crisis. In the mid-1990s, in order for US to recover from a recession, the Federal Reserve raised the interest rate at against inflation, and the currencies pegged to the US dollar also appreciated and hurt export growth. With a shock in both export and foreign investment, asset prices, which were leveraged by large amounts of credit, began to collapse and the panicked foreign investor began to withdraw. This explained the massive capital outflow and caused depreciation pressure on the currencies of the Asian countries. Collectively, the economies most affected saw a drop in capital inflows of more than 100 billion in the first year of the crisis. And then the Asian financial crisis became a global crisis and spread to the Russian and Brazilian economies. Next slide, please. The crisis is generally characterized as a financial crisis or economic crisis. And what happened in 1997 and 1998 can also be seen as a crisis of governance at the major levels of politics, national, global, and regional. Although Malaysia's controls on short-term capital were relatively effective at stemming the crisis in Malaysia and attracted much attention to the Prime Minister Mahathir bin Mohamad, which his ability to resist international monetary fund, which is the style reforms to most states. And then the inability to resist IMF pressures and reform drew attention to the loss of government control and general erosion of state authority. For example, we can see that in Indonesia, the failures of the state helped to transform an economic crisis into a political one, resulting in the downfall of Suharto, who had dominated Indonesian's politics for more than 30 years. That's all.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Farah Nurdiana binti Muhammad Tarmizi and I will be present the impact of Asian crisis. Okay, so the first one, the impact of Asian crisis is the number of GDP per capita dropped in most countries in Asia, which led to a severe recession phase. So as we can see in the graph, the GDP number of per capita in Indonesia dropped by 43.2%. In Thailand, dropped by 21.2%. In Malaysia, dropped by 19%. In South Korea, dropped by 18.5%. And in Philippines, dropped by 12.5%. So as we can see here, the Indonesia has the highest number drop in GDP per capita due to this crisis. So people in Indonesia lost their saving and stores were emptied as people hoarded and looted goods. Okay, so from this graph, we can see that most of the Asian countries face the sharp decline in GDP around 1997 to 1998. So we can see that the orange line, which is Indonesia line, is having a sharp decline due to this crisis. So I would like to remind that other Asian countries such as Hong Kong, mainland China, Singapore, and Japan were also affected, but less significantly compared to this country. Okay, next, the impact of Asian crisis is the currency exchange rates, stock markets, and prices of other assets all plunged. Okay, so based on this graph, we can see that the currency in most of the Asian countries is dropped. For example, in Thailand, the currency dropped by 40.2%. In Indonesia, dropped by 83.2%. In Philippines, dropped by 37.4%. In Malaysia, dropped by 45%. And in South Korea, dropped by 34.1%. So, for example, in Indonesia, because of the number of currency decrease in a quite huge number. It caused the businesses in the Indonesia with foreign loans to have to pay more money. In fact, between a few months, which is the January 1997 until July 1997, the value of 2,400 rupiah dropped to 10,000 rupiah per dollar. So even if in just a few months, the value of rupiah dropped a quite huge value. So because of that, many international investors become less interested in investing or lending to developing countries. Okay, lastly, um, because of the GDP per capita drop, it also lead to the increase in employment rates and inflation. So based on this table, we can see that around 1997 until 1998, the number of unemployment rates increased in most of Asia countries. So as we can see in the graph, from 1997, the Indonesia rate, the unemployment rate in Indonesia increased from 4.7% to 5.5%, in Malaysia 2.4% to 3.2%, in Philippines 7.9% to 9.6%, in Republic of Korea 2.6% to 6.8%, and in Thailand 0.9% to 3.4%. So other than that, in Malaysia, for example, the number of retrenchment also rose. As an example, in 1998, the number of retrenchment was 83,845, and it was a big increase compared to only 19,000 people retrenched in 1997. So, in the conclusion, the impact of Asian crisis, the number of GDP per capita is decreased, and the currency exchange also decreased, while the unemployment rates increase. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to give presentation about the lesson learned from the global crisis. So what are the things that we can learn from the global crisis? The first one is a safer banking system, more responsible approach to balance sheets, and better liquidity management. Banks no longer represent a major systemic risk in advanced countries, and especially in the US. That does not mean every country and every bank is safe, but the system as a whole is no longer the Achilles heel of the market-based economies. The second lesson is a more robust payment and settlement system. The strengthening of the banking system has been part of the highly successful broader effort to minimize the risk of sudden stops in the payment and settlement mechanism at the core of global economy. That is a loss of trust in counterparts that freeze even the most basic financial system and paralyzing economic interactions. The third one is still elusive inclusive growth. It took far too long for policymakers in advanced countries to realize that the Great Recession caused by the financial crisis had important structural and structural components. An excessively cyclical mindset initially impeded the design and implementation of the measures needed to generate high and exclusive growth. By the time mindset evolved, the political window had narrowed. Even today, most advanced countries have yet to adopt measures to drastically boost actual growth and stop the downward pressure on the potential expansions. The last lesson is reduce policy flexibility. There is a limited dry power to rely on the event of a crisis because interest rates are still floored at zero or below in much of the advanced countries outside the US. Central banks' balance sheets are already large, and debt levels are significantly higher than before the global financial crisis. This suggests that even if there is sufficient political will, the ability to crisis manage and recover may diminish compared to 10 years ago. And the next slide is we're going to talk about Islamic finance and global crisis. So how the Islamic see the global crisis. Performance of Islamic bonds. So in Islamic perspective, a key segment of the Islamic finance market is Islamic bonds, known as Sukuk. The global market of Islamic bonds is estimated to be approximately to be $80 billion currently, after increasing more than fivefold from 2004 to 2007. Global issuance of Sukuk hit a three-year low point in 2008, compared to only $46.7 billion in 2007. 15 corporate issuance represents about 60% of total new Islamic bonds issued in 2008. Sovereign and quasi-sovereign issues represents the remainder of new issuance. The bulk of Sukuk issuance comes from Malaysia and the United Arab Emirates. Although the Islamic bonds market is widening, while the Sukuk market is small in world's fastest growing financial instrument prior to the recent slowdown. I think that's all from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.